Sadly, we don't really have a lot to be proud of in the year past. In so many ways, 2021 has been horrible, annus horribilis. In fact, speaking of Her Majesty the Queen, well, she's been stoic as usual this year, despite the harrowing grief of the loss of the Prince Philip and, of course, the devastating reality of her own family's failures and its wokeness. The rest of the UK, well, it's hapless. Boris Johnson, he really is a huge flop, isn't he? I mean, his parrot-like rambling about climate change, it's set to deny Britain to actually be great. And the Ashes results, well, I think that's just the beginning of their woes. However, Australia has presented some dignity to the mother country, to the United Kingdom. The free trade agreement completed by Dan Tehan for the post-Brexit UK really is a great boon for us and for them. And likewise, the AUKUS Accord, good on you, Peter Dutton and Maurice Payne, regenerating the 20th century security partnerships between three of the oldest continuous democracies, the UK, the US and Australia. Well, all of that is important, as is the other Australian initiative, the Quadrilateral Agreement, the Quad, between Australia, the US, Japan and India. These agreements actually are important. They're legitimate indicators of an Australian government that is focused in on our national sovereignty and indeed our national security. However, we just can't rely on agreements and we just can't rely on others. We actually have to do some of the heavy lift ourselves. And as a nation, we've been complacent in too many of our efforts. Frankly, we've just been bone lazy. From national security to national sovereignty, we've just left it to chance. We're a lucky country after all. We've been lucky enough to get away with this lack of effort, but this has got to change. We need to govern in our best interests, not just simply follow some international agenda. We need all of our pollies from all parties on board with this project to advance Australia. But we are beset with the worst type of political tribalism right now, leading up to a federal election. State premiers, well, they seem to decide on political lines how much unity and effort they're going to offer to the task of a better and stronger Australia. Opponents who, in the middle of a health pandemic, decide that, well, they're going to pick on the Prime Minister's Christian values and his efforts. I mean, the Prime Minister, no matter what you say, genuinely believes that if he does his part, the states will do theirs. And I think he's been sadly betrayed by these premiers time and time again. I mean, I don't know how he keeps turning the other cheek. And for Labor, well, it's all game playing. It's not about governing. An alternative Prime Minister who spent his entire working life doing, well, nothing but game playing. And he's done nothing to bring these premiers to act nationally, preferring instead to play the same type of games that he's always played in Labor politics. It's worked so far for him. Internationally, the world suffers from the weakest president of the United States in my lifetime, and worldwide, we're governed by jargons, by the heavily influence of jingoistic rent seekers who seem to be manipulating the weak and the woke world leaders on this climate change nonsense, all to make a mozza from our own personal misery. The world order really is under genuine challenge as a result of there being no real counter voice to the chorus of doom we're hearing from Hollywood and all these other elites. The US has not just vacated the leadership space, they've actually joined the ranks of world leaders believing that we're all doomed unless we lower our living standards, pay more for electricity, and all that stuff. Australians have a strong regard for the might and the moral compass of the American people, but they're far from perfect, and there's aspects of their way of life that we certainly don't want here. But culturally, politically, and sadly, militarily, we've got a huge shared history. The history is important, our shared values are too, but we have to be frank with ourselves going forward into 2022. Australians today have inherited a society from the efforts of earlier generations, and too many of us are disconnected from how we actually arrived to where we are and the prosperity that we now enjoy. We need to expand our possibilities, not just live off the fat of the land won by the efforts of others. And we need more dams. We need to restore our cheap energy advantage that we used to have and not be driven to destroy our possibilities just to satisfy international interests. Many of them are just waiting to cash in on the subsidies needed to make all of their alternative power generation ideas actually work. And of course, politically, all of this climate change stuff is madness. And despite after election making the opinions of Australians clear, the weak and the woke, and now it seems the wealthy, believe they know better than the quiet Australians. And some, of course, now sponsoring candidates to try and unseat government MPs. So we end up with an even more dysfunctional parliament filled with climate change independents, the Greens and Labor, all doing deals to take your money and redistribute it to the wealthy investors in alternative energy who say they are woke. They don't care if you go broke. These self-proclaimed climate zealots, well, they really don't care if you suffer a lower standard of living. They're shills, they're shysters, and they're hanging around for a clip of the ticket. And they just aren't affected by what happens, just like the rest of us. Surely 2022 can be an improvement on what we've seen in the last 12 months. But if the polls are correct and we turn further left, our fate may well be sealed.